welcome back after the lunch break. I hope we're all satisfied, and we can go to the next panel dedicated to housing policy. We're going to go to conclusions and recommendation from series of expert workshop. The DiverCITY4 Polish-Norwegian cooperation in the field of creating modern development solution in cities benefits from a 300,000 euro grant from Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway through the EEA and Norway grants. The initiative aims to identify the most effective solutions and create a cooperation network, as well as exchange experience between Polish self-governments and the donor states, with particular emphasis on the subject of social participation in urban renewal and improvement of the urban environment. Let me just remind you that we recommend to use face mask to keep the social distancing in order to be safe and we all leave this place healthy and satisfied. The meeting is translated into Polish and English, so when you will ask questions, you can use both of these languages. And our guests today here in Wrocław are Magdalena Majer-Wydra, who was the housing thematic leader, PhD, engineer, urban planner, development of geography and regional development of University of Wrocław, as well as Mr. Jan Cieśla, PhD engineer, project manager, designer from Mimo Wieku Foundation from Warsaw. We're also going to have online guests who is going to be Mr. Anders Bolin Borgersen, Senior Advisor, Werfel Development, also Municipality, Norway. So now, please, Magda and Jan, take over.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. However, we noticed that most of you are from Poland. That's why we try to change the language into Poland, and I will just start into Poland just to your comfort. Więc chciałabym zacząć teraz już faktycznie po polsku, żeby Państwu też ułatwić.
So okay, I will start in Polish because it will be easier for us, for you to understand us, that you can take from this meeting as much as you can. Once again, I would like to present, I think, the smallest team of experts, but I think the strongest one in terms of housing. Here with us we have Mr. Architect from Poland, Mr. Jan Cieśla. We will also connect online with experts from Norway, Mr. Anders Borgensten. Unfortunately, Mr. Expert from Iceland couldn't be with us online, but I refer you to materials because in the article we will, of course, develop the issues we are tackling today, and each expert contributed to this article. So please refer to the article after the conference. So again, our names and surnames, and now I will give the microphone to the expert from Poland who will present our ideas in terms of housing. How can we create this space? I would like to welcome everyone, so let's move on with presentation. I think that this is not exactly planned change of languages wouldn't be bothering you. I think that you won't be anxious because the slides will be in English, but I will be presenting them in Polish. Hopefully it will be clear. Thank you for changing the slides. Okay. It was really satisfying for me and pleasure for me to be actually invited as expert to this workshop, but also to work with other experts. The team was small, but very interdisciplinary. Around this broad topic and complex topic as housing, I would like to refer to Professor Miranovich's presentation, but we had in our expert lawyer, economist, and architect. So we decided after discussions that our presentation to you, summing up our discussions and workshop, would be as coherent as possible, and that we present clearly everything we managed to discuss. So sorry for this strict order of communicates I'm going to present, so disciplined, but it can be provocative for you and encouraging you to take part in the discussion later. We started from theoretical discussions, but of course it's difficult to omit inherent factors of housing stock in Poland. Once again, we have to refer to a wonderful presentation of Professor Miranowicz. Housing buildings, residential buildings create the city. We wish that housing market, housing stock would be a big part of this housing development in Poland. We hope that municipal stock, municipal housing is a fantastic tool to create and shape cities, far more than just provision satisfying basic needs of residents. This is something more. It's a great tool to revitalize, regenerate cities, and to include revitalization programs. And when we talk about municipal housing, it is one of controllable elements of the city. In our opinion, cities need to have such controllable tools, as many as possible. Here we would also like to point out that municipal housing stock is, in terms of the city, municipal housing stock is not only about buildings, but also an occasion to present best practices, even to create competition for the private sector, or at least change the reference point to which private companies or construction companies, private construction companies can aim to or can refer to. Of course, it's difficult, it's impossible to negate some features of housing stock, which we associate with a burden to the cities, than with something that has potential for development in Poland. And when I was listening to my colleagues from Iceland and Norway, we agreed that housing stock is most frequently associated with great burden, financial burden for the cities. But on the other hand, conditions of living in the city, and we hope this housing stock is an important, vital element which shapes this environment of living in a particular city. It can also translate to well-being of residents of the city, which has also direct connection to economic effects. I'm talking here about cost costs of healthcare, costs of social care. If we talk about economic aspects, we cannot forget about job market, which is associated with city attractiveness for investors and for young people. And I hope you will agree with me that expensive workforce experts we hire not because of good salary, but also because of attractiveness of the city, attractiveness of the area. So if you can use it as an element of marketing, to market the city, to market the municipality, to convince the valuable workforce to migrate, to come to us, then, well, it's a great way to look at it. As a housing stock, as an element of fostering activity, attractiveness, of the city. It was said many times, I think, before, but I can repeat it again and again, and I hope it's not the point for discussion. Have flats, an apartment, is one of the human rights. We are obliged morally and legally to provide housing for residents of the city. That is why the part of housing stock of municipality will be social. But we are convinced that ambitions for creators of this stock should be much broader than that. On the other hand, we should remember that if investors of housing, municipal housing, is a public sector, then this sector should use many special conditions, legal regulations, from financial guarantees to maybe quicker process of making such decision, making administrative decisions. Why? The housing stock cannot be compared only to private investments because I hope I mentioned it. They have much broader functions than just to respond to the demand for housing in a given city, in a given town. But the reality so far is not so wonderful. This is a great contrast to the conditions that are now present in Norway or Iceland. They're all many different estimates, but about 5% of housing stock is actually directly controlled by municipalities. So when I said before that buildings create the city, so only in 5% the city controls such buildings. On the other hand, and I'm really sad to tell you that buildings owned by the city are due to reactive policy, not proactive housing policy. I'm an architect and I have to tell you about standards, technical standards. When we look carefully at the investment budget, not the cost of living of the building, we have to fulfill minimal technical requirements. We know that legal regulations and technical standards do not reflect the actual situation of best practices. So we cannot go below these standards, but law never defines actual standards that need to be met and good practices. I'm not talking here about broadly described about energy effectiveness, but here I want to tell you also about the accessibility of such buildings for people with special needs, not only disabled people, but also the elderly people. I don't wish you, of course, being disabled, but all of us will be old one day. So maybe not all, but the majority of us will be old one day. So at the beginning, I tell you about 5%. So I need also to tell you that this 5% is unfortunately these buildings are not located well. They are not attractive for residents. So such buildings, such estates are, in our opinion, supporting inclusiveness. They don't foster social bonding, consolidation of local communities. And our discussions were to find the propositions or to make some ranking of steps that need to be taken now. I hope that this simple slide shows very simple but brutal truth. On one hand, we have housing needs. At present, the situation in Poland is like that only private companies respond to the housing needs, and we know that free market is not perfect. And when we take into consideration the fact that housing is the special need, we have imbalance in many cities, and we wish that local authorities would have proper housing policy, that they could influence a local housing market, and that would lead to some balance if we, of course, talk here about social fairness in the housing market, because this is connected with social fairness. We think that activities of leaders of the cities and municipalities to obtain this balance, they need to use 3 different areas, and they need to use tools in 3 different areas, because they can actually do it. They are able to do it. First of all, legal framework, legal order, different instruments, economic instruments, local policy, tax policy, maybe even some specialized financial measures, then legal regulations. I think each of us, we as experts, we tried to express our advice or tell clearly what should be done, what is the best to do. I will start from the issue associated with architecture and spatial order. Well, I'm educated also in finances. I'm not only an architect, but we build differently for if we're limited with the budget, and we do it differently when we are the future host or owner of the building that will later in the future we will later rent flats in this building. Well, in short, we think that the approach of cost of municipal housing in the life cycle is only the right solution. And of course, we talk here about operational costs, not about the realization cost. It should be the main criteria to prepare such investments.
I also feel that it shouldn't be like it shouldn't be that we compare residential housing, public residential housing with private one, and that we're just we're keeping the average level of that. It shouldn't be like that. In a given economic conditions situation, if a private company in these conditions is able to achieve certain level of quality that is then resulting in certain financial effect, then projects that would be a result of public sector's operations and activities should be oriented on showing the best practices, not so much the revenue, showing examples of not the most affordable housing in terms of purchase and sales, but showing a structure that can be an example to follow for others, that can be the residential policy manifestation, rather than fulfilling certain conditions that were defined somewhere in the top levels. So, if we talk about the role of providing roof over people's head, the basic one, let's look at not only at people. Let's not only look at people who can't help themselves or are disabled materially, socially, but also let's look at people who are disabled physically, or the elderly, people being with special moments of their life like maternity. Their needs need to be taken into account in public residential designs. And this is due to not only social justice, but also looking at our project economically. We are making the target group for our structures bigger. We are able to respond to our citizens' needs to a broader scale, and this should be one of the main missions of residential development. On the other hand, it's a very good example showing that showing that we have a goods that there's a huge big demand for. So it means it's attractive. So everyone would like to live in there. Returning to the function of the spatial shaping job or task of our architecture. On one hand, we're influencing the well-being of our citizens. On the other hand, we market a given municipality.
I think now it's time, Anders, to give you the...
Hello?
Sorry, just heard the translator.
Hello.
Anders, the floor is yours. The economic aspects. Here we go.
Yes, that's my field. First, I would like to thank Wrocław Municipality for the opportunity to be part of this group. It's been for me also, it's been a very good learning process, and you have to think of your own work in a completely other way when you meet foreign countries. Difficulties, and it's like, and I'm very sorry that I'm not able to be at the conference. It would be the best to see you all and to talk about this there. But the group has been very good, and it's been very interesting work. So I'm just going to talk about the economic part of the housing market and the municipalities. And we've been talking, and municipal housing can be an instrument to attract investors and decide workforce. We always look at, maybe it's easy to look at municipal housing just as a way to house poor people, and it's just a cost. But if the municipality owns the apartments, owns the flats, owns the ground, then also the municipality and the people who lives in the municipality gets part of the investment and part of the what you call it, the gains. So it's very important not just to think of it as something that only costs money. It's also an investment. And municipal housing has, at least in Norway, and I think other municipalities don't go bankrupt in the same way as companies does, that people does. So you can invest with a lower risk than maybe on a personal level. So it's very important to take these things in account when you are like counting the numbers where to invest and not to invest. And it's like a potential. You have much gains in housing projects to generate like new municipal and private housing stock. So it's very important to think of this before you start investment, and that's before we're talking about the people who are living in the housing. That's just for the municipality. So maybe the next, yes, perfect. And it's like, because Norway has also had the same problem. We have it still maybe about low maintenance, but low quality in the municipal housing. But to meet that, we will try. The municipalities are increasingly using something like a cost covering rent. That much of the problem, at least in Norway, and as I also heard in Poland, is that the rent you take from the municipal housing is so low. It's too low to finance like the necessary maintenance and everything. So it's important if you introduce like a cost covering rent, or not the market rent, I think, but that could also be a solution. But a market rent is a high rent to meet for many of the people who live in municipal housing, but the cost covering rent is at least, and it is ways to calculate this cost covering rent. So that I'm hopefully going to talk more about in the article to pin out. And also, if you introduce cost covering rent, you raise the rent in municipal housing, then you can introduce like a housing allowance to the people who can't meet the cost covering rent. You can make it like in Norway. You can make it a state financed allowance, or you can get a local financed allowance. And you can use like some of the surplus from the cost covering rent to finance this, because the thought with this is that then when you have a general subsidy of the rent, then everybody who lives in the housing gets a subsidy. But if you just have if you have a housing allowance, then you can give the subsidy to the people who need the subsidy, and the rest can go to maintenance and development of the housing, the municipal housing. And then it's not so, because some of the problem with just having a municipal housing for the poorest people is that you get a bad living environment, because you have low socioeconomic standards and everything. And if you use a housing allowance, then you can subsidize like the people who need it, and then you also can have people living there who have a better economics, and then you get more diversity in the municipal housing sector. So that's one of the important, one of the more important advice that I can give you. And then it's number 14, yes. And also Norway, we have cheap loans for affordable housing. We have cheap loans we have cheap loans that go directly to the private person, that they can buy their own housing, maybe to people who are not allowed to not able to get a loan from the mainstream banks, from the private banks, and you also can have cheap loans for the municipalities. And it's not like you're going to subsidize or giveaways. It's more like you have a loan with a lower rent, and this you can give to municipalities, or you can give it to private sector. In Norway, we use it. We're trying now and increasingly use it to give it to private sector. If the private sector rents out 20% of the apartments to people that the municipality are helping. So in the Norwegian tax rules and investment rules, this is it's profitable for the rental companies. And also you have the fourth suggestion is like introducing financing for cooperatives, multiple ownerships. It's all about reducing risks, and also having risk for one household, just to diversify risks, but it's also about reducing risks for the financing companies. Then you have more people who are responsible, and you can also have more control in planning. And it's also possible, like they have in Denmark, and like we're trying to get back in Norway, like more of a cost control in this type of cooperatives. You get money back, but maybe not in the high-rising market. So it's easier for much of at least the problem in Norway is for new households, for young households to get into the market, at least in Oslo and in the other cities with the high-rising prices. And these are people we need. We need people. We don't want them to move to other parts of the country because they can't get a house. We need them in Oslo as well. We need the nurse. We need the fireman to work there. And then we also need housing for them. And then with the high rising prices and the high investments we see in Oslo, it's very much important to get the market for these people where they can live. So that is this is one of the suggestions. I think I have one more, huh? Yes. And then you go. We were talking about the neighborhoods with low standards, where people where we have very low socioeconomic problems, like your old communist flats, and we also have kind of these areas in Norway where we have at least a lot of poor people, a lot of immigrants with a lot of socioeconomic problems, and we've been trying to meet it with area programs who go in very broadly, not in each and everyone's flat, but in the surroundings, like developing parks, developing good school environment for the kids, developing maybe some good sports or other voluntarily areas. And this is the experience is that the more bottom up the programs are, the better they work, because we started these programs with a lot of bureaucrats like me going in and trying to say to people what we should do, and that doesn't work so well. It's first when we get the locals, the idealists, the locals, the local, what you call it, the people who burn for their neighborhood, when they start to get involved, then you start to get work. And this is also something that we're going to explain more in the article, but that's type of it. This is one thing that it costs us money, but it doesn't have to cost much money. It's more and more about getting getting people to get involved in their neighborhood, and getting people to get some common grounds, not just that the neighbor is my enemy, but the neighbor is someone that I have common problems with and common interests with. So that's one of the most important things that we were discussing, and that is my suggestion to try. Yes, then I think we are finished. Yes. Now we're on the legal part. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anders, very much. And again, back to Polish version. Bardzo żałuję, że nie ma
I
z
really
nami
regret that
naszego przyjaciela
our friend
z
from
Islandii,
Iceland is not with us,
który
who
starał się podczas
was
naszych
trying
rozmów
during our discussions
przekonać
convince us
przede wszystkim
mainly
regulacjach prawnych
about legal
zorientowanych
frameworks
na pewną stabilizację
concentrated
z jednej
on
strony,
stabilization, on stabilizing policy.
najmu.
Rent policy.
Wszyscy zgodziliśmy
On
się,
one hand,
że,
we all agreed
mieszkania wynajmowane
that
są,
renting
kluczem do
flats
sukcesu,
for
jeśli
rent
chodzi o,
are key for
mieszkania w
success
sposób
in
mieszkaniowy,
terms of housing
gminy.
stock in the
Tutaj dziś już
municipality.
wielokrotnie
Today
wybrzmiewał,
also we
temat
talked
wpływu
about the
najmu
influence of
krótkoterminowego
short-term
i,
rent
spekulacji
and
wokół,
speculative
mieszkań.
housing.
Stąd, szczególny
That is
nacisk
why
był
we
kładziony na,
focused on
najem co najmniej
rent,
średniej, jeśli nie
maybe not long-term rent, but at least medium
tutaj wskazujemy
rent.
niebezpieczeństwo,
Of course, we here see some problem with stagnation of regulations
regulacji najmu. Oczywiście
regarding the
powraca temat
renting.
nadmiernej
Of course, here we also
ochrony
talk
jednej
about
ze
the
stron rynku
overprotection
najmu, to
of
znaczy z jednej
one
strony
side of the
właściciel,
side. We have
z
the
drugiej
owner
strony
on one hand,
osoba
and on the other hand, we
wynajmująca.
have the
Tutaj absolutnie
person
konieczne są
renting
regulacje,
the
które,
flat. We need here
tymi
regulations
ryzykami sobie
to
radzą. Trudno
deal with
wskazywać
such risks of
jednoznacznie
overprotecting one side of this.
rozwiązania
Of course,
dla
there
Polski
are
ze
no
względu
clear
na
solutions
różnice
for
pomiędzy
Poland because there are
systemami,
different legal systems in different
praktykami na
countries
rynku
and there are
nieruchomości,
different
które
practices on
jeszcze
real estate
działają po
market
prostu
in
w
different
Islandii
countries. They are
i
different in Iceland and
Norwegii.
Norway, in Poland. We
Na
cannot
pewno w
compare them.
Polsce,
But in Poland,
mieszkania
housing
na wynajem,
for
choć,
rent,
na szczęście pojawiają się, nie
but
są
fortunately,
uznawane za
there are
tą
some,
opcję
but they are not
podstawową.
the basic
Tutaj dostrzegamy, że
form of
kluczową
housing in
rolę
Poland.
ma,
Here we see that
wiarygodność,
the key
przewidywalność
role is
dostępności
the
tego zasobu
predictability
i
of
właśnie
this stock
odpowiednie regulacje,
and proper regulation of
prawne
this stock.
są kluczowe.
Such regulations
Obserwujemy,
are
że
key.
tutaj rozwój
We
w Polsce
observe
idzie w
that
dobrym,
in
w
Poland we
dobrym
go in good direction, in proper
Drodzy
direction
Państwo,
in terms of legal solutions.
w 4 punktach
In
chcielibyśmy
4 points,
zawrzeć
we would
nasze
like to include our
przesłanie i podsumować naszą
presentation
pracę,
and sum up
która
our
doprowadziła nas
work,
do
which
dzisiejszej,
led us to
konferencji.
today's
Jeszcze raz
conference.
podkreślamy,
Again,
że
we
polityka
have to
mieszkaniowa to nie jest
highlight
polityka
that
wyłącznie
housing
wokół
policy
mieszkań.
is not
To jest
only
polityka
about
wokół jednego
housing,
z
not only about flats and building.
najbardziej
This is one of
kształtujących,
the most shaping
miasto, elementów.
elements.
I to właśnie
One of the
polityka
most
mieszkaniowa
elements, one
powinna
of
być
the elements that
integralnym
shapes the city the most, and it
marketingu
should be the
miast,
integral part of city's
polityki
marketing,
społecznej,
social
polityki,
policy,
przestrzennej.
spatial policy as well.
Zabudowa
So it's not about the
mieszkaniowa
flats.
musi być zabudową
Housing stock
zrównoważoną,
should be sustainable.
w naszym przekonaniu
We think
budowaną w oparciu
it should be
o kryterium
built based on
kosztu
the
operacyjnego,
operational cost
co w
criterium.
naszym przekonaniu
We
zaskutkuje
believe
trwałością tych
it will
budynków,
translate to
ich
the sustainability,
energooszczędnością i
durability
być
of
może,
these buildings and cost effectiveness of such buildings and other solutions that will facilitate adapting a functional adaptation for special needs. And also there is a need to adapt this housing to special needs of groups with, for example, disability of special needs. In terms of technical aspects, we believe that housing should be, of course, open to rent, but we see some problems and lacks in legal regulations in terms of renting flats. So we propose solutions that on one hand will make this renting policy flexible. It will allow flexible management of such housing, that actually apartments and flats will be directed to the people in need. We also need to take part subletting, that flats should be able to sublet. And the last optimistic point from us, we think that because housing market, housing stock arises as one of the main actor on the real estate, so municipality, so public sector. We shouldn't be afraid to use other instruments of local authorities to foster such policy, such housing policy. There should be special legal, or even economical preferences for the municipal housing stock. That's why we think that local authorities won't get rid of this housing stock. They won't treat it as a burden, but they will take the wheel and they will drive and proper the city, because housing stock is a great drive for the city. I will only comment to sum up the discussion. I would like to tell you that what we've discussed is just a small part of what we actually mentioned in the article, because the housing topic is so broad, so elaborate, that we would take much more time than that to develop all the aspects we wanted to mention. During our workshop, we were in the shoes of each social group, because housing is associated with accessibility, we were thinking about different social groups, and we are thinking also about environment. All the issues we are now discussing constitute a priority for us in terms of the future. This is important for the future, and we would like to point out that we need to realize at the same time all these programs in three, let's so-called bricks: architectural, legal, and economical. But most of all, the economic should be treated in long term. On one hand, it seems obvious, but on the other hand, we still see that there is marginalized. Thank you very much for participation, and if you have any questions, you can ask them now. Yes, we have still 10 minutes for questions, so if there are any questions, maybe you have thoughts in terms of municipality housing, you have now a chance to ask the question. You can just raise your hand and we will give you the microphone.
To samo dotyczy oczywiście uczestników.
Of course, the same goes for the online members of our conference. So the chat is open. Feel free to ask your questions. Well, if there are no questions, I would like one more time to ask how in your team that comprised of 4 countries, that spanned 4 countries, have you encountered any problems that were a result of a completely different situation in each of these 4 countries? Let me take that question. We were dealing not only with differerences resulting from us being from different countries, but also we all had different professional background. But despite these differences, we noticed that same threats and deficits, although in certain, different sizes, different level of seriousness in terms of municipal, communal housing that is probably undergoing global processes and under global influence. Let me give you an example, an effect of speculative housing on the applications like Airbnb, on the way we use residential tissue. Wrocław is a very popular tourist destination, but also Iceland in general as a country, or Oslo, are very popular. And I remember that this reverberated quite strongly in our workshops. And adding to that, I wanted also to say that there were a lot of similarities, certain differences, of course, and the differences were mainly based on social needs, because both Iceland and Norway have right now the biggest needs of these two countries deal with migrants. In our case, in Poland, we still divide it into the size of the cities, because we tried to orient and to direct our solutions to big and small cities, but only some of our considerations only pertained to bigger cities. So we noticed that the economic situation, so our problems in terms of economy were similar in terms of Wrocław and those biggest European cities as well. So I'm looking around the room. Is there anyone else who would like to take the floor and ask something? If not, I would like to thank to all the participants of this thematic group for all the work that you committed to prepare these workshops and the presentation. And I would like to thank all the members of the audience for participating in the housing panel. Now we have a break, and in half an hour we're meeting in the multifunctional hall, multifunctional room, to summarize our today's meetings and to say goodbye. Thank you very much.